Every year I know we gonna go hard. We been that team ever since Bart started. All my cheese heads go pack go. Ain't showing no mercy, cutting no slack, no. I ain't a bad sport and I'll even wish you good luck. Only thing I will.
What up? Welcome to Lombardi's Legends podcast. Wags, Dane, we're back, baby. After our last podcast with our special guest, Benny Sapp III, we are now talking Packer free agency, and we're just so glad that you're joining us yet again. Wags, how you doing, buddy? I can't believe it. It's already March. It's already free agency. It's already the draft's coming around the corner. There's no off season in Green Bay, and certainly not right now on Lombardi's Legends. So how you doing, bud?
I'm doing good, man. And just we're recording here on Sunday morning, March 10th. So we'll be playing this episode, planning for tomorrow night. So if there's any breaking news that happens between this morning and tomorrow evening, that would be why we may or may not have that as part of the discussion on today's episode. And also why Dane and I are sitting here on a nice, chilly Sunday morning drinking coffee. So thank you so much for joining us, though. I'm looking forward to this conversation, Dane. And yeah, it's been a minute since we've talked Packer football, but I think it's a very appropriate time to jump in. Things are starting to gear up here. We have a little bit of silly season right now as Packer fans get their hopes up that this is going to be the year that we're going to cash in on a bunch of free agents and really attack the market. So we'll engage in some of that conversation here today and see what we think Packers may or may not want to do with this window that they have coming up very shortly.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be fun. So Wags, how do we want to kick this thing off? What do you think? Because there's so much we could talk about, and we're going to touch on a lot of stuff. But I mean, do we want to just dig right into the Packers situation and maybe some of the priority spots that they could be targeting, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think maybe just start with, why don't we just take a peek at where the Packers are when it comes to a cap situation, and certainly relative to the rest of the league is also something to be taken into consideration. So as things stand right now, Packers have, according to Over the Cap, just over $13.5 million in cap space. We all know that can be manipulated in a lot of different ways, and we expect some moves here that we'll get into here shortly to make that happen. So I think it's important to think about the fact that even though the Packers can create a lot more cap space than what they currently are showing on the books, we have to kind of keep in mind where they are against the rest of the league, because we might want to go find some guys, but if, for example, someone like the Washington Commanders, who currently have over 90 million in cap space, really wants to spend on the free agent market, things can quickly get out of hand in terms of even some of the players the Packers may be interested in. So realistically, Packers are around 15th to 20th to 25th in that range. So they're in not at the bottom end when it comes to current cap space, but certainly they're not, amongst teams that have the most. So I think that's kind of relative to keep in mind. But Dean, I know there's some moves that you expect and all Packer fans expect to make. And I think one of them seems like the writing on the wall is that David Bakhtiari's time in Green Bay is coming to an end. And so that could potentially open up quite a bit of cap room. They'll be carrying some liability in terms of dead cap space. But with the window the Packers have in terms of the young players on this roster, I think now makes more sense than ever, irrespective of David's injury status currently, to move on and try to bite the bullet here and potentially open up a little bit more cap space as they not only go into this offseason, but in future seasons as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the right football decision. Not only the right business decision, but with the injury and with the ascension of Rashid Walker at left tackle, I just think it's a logical choice. The Packers need to get more space, and David's going to be very likely to be a cap casualty here pretty quickly. The other one, Wags, that I think all Packer fans are aware of are Devondre Campbell, inside linebacker. I think that his days are numbered at Green Bay as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that both of those moves happen here in the very, very short term. The big one that I'm circling, and I think you're circling as well, and all fans are, is Aaron Jones, right? Aaron Jones has a high cap number. All indication is that Aaron Jones is going to be a Green Bay Packer next year. He's done some cap gymnastics in the past to stay in Green Bay. He's dynamic, but also, going to be getting closer to 30 and had some injuries again last year. So I'd be very surprised if he doesn't come back to Green Bay on a reworked deal. But I think that that's the big one that we're all paying attention to is, can the Packers and Aaron Jones come to some kind of agreement where both parties are mutually benefiting, right, from Aaron Jones coming back to Green Bay. So that's the one, I think, more than the others that I'm really keeping an eye on, because I believe that Bakhtiari and Devondre Campbell are kind of a foregone conclusion that they will not be in Green Bay. Aaron Jones, I'm 85% sure he's back in Green Bay, but until that deal's actually done, I want to see what happens and what they can get done on paper.
Sure, and I wouldn't be surprised if what they try to do with Aaron Jones is, I don't know the exact semantics of it, but most likely they extend him and give him some void years. This is in all likelihood going to be the last contract for Aaron Jones. One of the tricky things I think with Aaron is we all know his value. We saw it at the end of the season. However, he's also a running back that's going to be over 30 years old, and he had a lot of injuries last year. So it's one of those tricky deals where you have to kind of thread the line on how much money you can really invest in Aaron Jones, knowing how much he means to this team. He's one of those guys that, he's one of those veteran players that I think clearly meshes with an up and coming team in a locker room that they have. The term veteran leadership, I think, gets thrown around and overused a little bit, but Aaron Jones truly embodies veteran leadership. And that said, not every veteran player has to be a leader. You could just have good veteran players too. But Aaron Jones, I think it means a lot more to the Packers, especially with this young team, than he would somewhere else. And so I firmly believe that they're going to work something out and try to make this a situation where he feels valued, but the Packers can move forward at a more tenable number. Dane, I did want to ask too, going back to Devondre Campbell, we're arguably a little bit thin at linebacker. Do you feel like the Packers are comfortable? I think we both saw eye test, not only with some of the injuries, but even outside of that. Maybe Devondre would argue, well, I was playing at less than 100%, which is probably, to be fair, true. And that could have affected what we were seeing. But he just looked a step slow last year when he was out on the field. And all respect to Devondre Campbell, he gave us a couple of really good years, deserved the contract that he got at the time we gave it to him. But I have to agree with you. He's in that range where of a player at his age, 31 years of age, and he's making over 10 million a year. And that just becomes kind of a situation where we see this all over the league, cap casualties. But what I want to ask you is, do you feel that's a June 1st cut or a post June 1st cut? Because if they designate him post June 1st, that actually carries less dead cap money on next year. And this, however, it doesn't free up money now during this free agency period for the Packers to be able to utilize. So I think that's going to be a little bit of a gymnastics to balance as well. But they could carry a lot less liability if they make him a post June 1st cut. That goes from, over 11 million in dead cap money to just over 2 million in dead cap money. So it's a pretty interesting thing that the Packers could save that one for a post June 1st, and maybe they're able to use some of that extra money that would free up to attack the free agency market later post draft and try to pick up some guys on the margins as well.
It's a really good point, Wags, and that's the strategy, right? And that's really what's going to be fascinating about this free agency period for the Green Bay Packers. I mean, we came up in a time over the last 15 years where when Ted Thompson was GM, we knew no free agents were coming to Green Bay, or very, very unlikely that a free agent at all was going to come to Green Bay. Under Goody, it's been kind of a mixed bag, right? We've seen some additions. We saw a very aggressive year with Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith and Adrian Amos all coming in, and that was a very aggressive year. We've also seen seasons where Goody less aggressive with the bigger name free agents, but really, really skilled at finding veteran talent that can fit the team. I think of Rasul Douglas. I think of Devondre Campbell. I think of some of those kinds of guys. Keyshawn Nixon's another good example, right? Of guys that he's been able to bring in on lesser deals that have been big impact players for the team. So the Packers have done a little bit of both under Gutekunst, and he's a really good, I think, talent evaluator. He's very good at finding guys that fit this roster well. And he's always active, right? And kind of working the margins for this team. So the question really does become, what do the Packers want to do going into this free agency? I mean, every team always wants to add a bunch of big name talent. But this year it's going to be fascinating, especially with the new defensive coordinator, with Coach Hafley. How do they want to do it? Because I think I don't think I'm overstating this, Wags. The safety position is extremely thin in Green Bay. And based on everything we've read and seen from the new defensive coaching staff, it's also a primary position. They need a very talented safety in the back end to see through the defense the way that they want to see through the defense. There's a ton of free agent safeties. So strategically, are the Packers looking to make a big splash in free agency, trying to add a safety and then matching it with a draft pick? Could the Packers add two safeties like they did with the edge with Zadarius and Preston Smith? Could they just go with some veteran talent a little bit later? All of these things I think are on the table right now for the Packers. So I don't know if I have an answer for it, but I wouldn't be totally surprised if the Packers try to become players early for a safety, because I've heard Goody twice now, I think, in different interviews say, they could leverage some of that draft capital to bring a veteran in, which is kind of an odd and interesting thing. And then, so that's another aspect where you're paying a guy one way or another. You have to make that cap space available. So I just think the Packers are going to be active in trying to find a veteran safety to help stabilize the back end of this defense.
Okay. Well, I guess we may as well just talk about safety then and jump in real quickly, just to kind of give a little bit of setting where we're at with the moves we just talked about. That puts the Packers at around maybe 45 to 50 million in cap space, depending on how they restructure Aaron Jones' deal. They could make more moves that could free up a substantial amount of money. Two guys to keep an eye on are Kenny Clark and Jair Alexander. If we want to restructure their contracts, that kicks the can a little bit. So I don't necessarily expect them to touch those contracts early on in the process. But if Packers want to get really aggressive and sign a few guys, then those are some options that are out there to them to free up some additional space as well. One thing to keep in mind before we lean all the way into that safety discussion, Dane, we're going to sign Jordan Love at some point. So a big chunk of change is going to have to go to that contract. Jordan is clearly showed that he deserves to get a big contract as a starting quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. So that's out there. So don't lose sight of that. And obviously they have to have enough money to sign all of their draft players as well. So, I mean, even with 45 to 50 million, all of a sudden that can get sucked up pretty quickly when you just consider those two aspects. So it sounds like a lot on paper, but it's enough to make some moves, no doubt. But let's dive into the safeties. And then can we talk a little bit about the three safeties that had meaningful playing time for the Packers last year? Because I just want to do a little touch base with you and find out, are any of these guys going to be back with the Green Bay Packers, in your opinion? So just looking at Darnell Savage, Rudy Ford, and then, of course, Jonathan Owens, all of them started games for the Packers at safety last year. Frankly, I think there was a lot of nervousness from fans about the safety position. And overall, considering that nervousness, I don't know if it was warranted, unwarranted, but either way, it does seem like, as you said, with Hafley coming in, the importance that he puts on a one high safety and some looks, that's going to be a premium position to attack or try to upgrade. So I guess the first question is, are any of these three guys, do you think, Dane, in the plans as maybe a lower cost, especially exactly what they did last year? Rudy Ford and Jonathan Owens came in on veteran, minimum or minimum-ish type deals. So do you see any of these guys being in the plans for the Packers to at least compete for an opportunity for a starting role, or to be in the room as potentially a backup at that safety position?
I do, Wags. I'll tell you what. So I think Darnell Savage's time in Green Bay is done. I just think it's time for both sides to move on that. So I do not expect Darnell Savage Jr. to be back. But where it does get interesting is both with Rudy Ford and Jonathan Owens. Both of these guys are veteran players that have a lot of experience playing on defense, but they also bring a lot of experience on special teams as well. Rudy Ford made his bread and butter for years and years down in Jacksonville as a gunner, and a really talented one. He got an extended opportunity in Green Bay. Unfortunately, the injury happened a couple times here this last year, but when he played, I thought was probably one of the more consistent defensive backs the Packers had over the last 2 years. And then Jonathan Owens, I think he led the team in tackles on special teams last year, and also was playing double duty and playing a lot of defense, and had some big pop plays as well on the defensive side. So that's where it gets interesting, right, Wags? Is we talk about it a lot with the young guys on the roster, but also let's talk about some of the veterans, guys that can do more, the Packers value. And both of these guys are guys that can do more. Now the question becomes, which one would the Packers really value? Could the Packers bring both back to compete in camp? It's hard to say, but I wouldn't sleep on either Jonathan Owens or Rudy Ford, or possibly both, coming back to Green Bay, depending on how free agency and the draft goes for the Packers. But this is a Packers team that last year, I think they went 5 deep at safety. I think that they really like Anthony Johnson Jr., Benny Sapp III, really played good special teams, and is an ascending player as well. But say that the Packers sign a free agent, like a bigger name free agent, draft a guy, right? There's still opportunity there, right, for a veteran safety. So I think one of those two guys could theoretically be coming back to Green Bay. And I would actually be surprised if neither come back. I'd be surprised if both come back, but I do think that there's a lane for either Rudy or Jonathan Owens. It could come down to contract. It could come down to opportunity for that safety going somewhere else, but I wouldn't be surprised if Owens or Rudy Ford are coming back. But it's hard to say which one. If I had to lean one way right now, I would probably say Rudy Ford. Even though Jonathan Owens got the start when Rudy was healthy, I think Rudy Ford has a little bit more ability to play either position in this defense than Jonathan Owens does. I think he's just a little bit more versatile in the back end for this Packers team. But wouldn't be surprised with how well Jonathan Owens played in Green Bay last year, certainly, if he was the guy who came back. But I do think that they're going to bring a veteran presence guy back here to compete and also play some special teams.
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily need to be a day one free agency type move. I think either of those guys are probably 1-year deals at this point. So I agree. Probably bring at least one of them back. They're going to draft safeties. They might draft a couple of safeties. We've got Andre Johnson Jr. As a guy they drafted last year that got some looks, maybe wasn't quite ready in his opportunity late in the season. But it could come down to health too. Love Rudy Ford, obviously biased, friend of the show, but we see it all the time in this business. Unfortunately, you mentioned not something that I'm holding against Rudy, the injuries last year, but Jonathan Owens stayed healthy. So that's availability is a skill, especially if you're going to be a backup player, potentially, or competing for a starting role. You definitely need to make sure you can stay healthy as much as possible. And that's more bad luck than anything else for Rudy Ford, but I could see that being a factor as well. All right. So, Dane, I think we're in agreement there. Probably one of those guys might be someone we bring back. And certainly, I think we have seen the last of Darnell Savage Jr. as a Green Bay Packers. So, let's get into then the outside free agents at the safety position. You know, the Packers, are they really going to compete at the top of the safety market here, Dane? It might be a little bit compressed, supposedly, in terms of what these guys are going to command for annual salary. However, it's rare to see the Packers attack this position. So I will say this. I suspect there's someone or maybe a couple of guys that they really want to target and really have in mind. And I don't think the Packers are going to go out and sign a safety just to sign a safety. I think if they don't get one of their top one or two guys or someone that they're really high on, that's when you might see them punt, lean into the draft and try to just maybe get a stopgap type player at a lower cost. It won't necessarily make us fans super excited, but I don't think the Packers are going to overpay just for the sake of getting a bigger name guy to come in. We do see a bunch of players here at safety position that are perhaps recognizable names, but there's also a bunch of players that are recognizable names that are getting up there in age. So, Dane, I'm just going to turn it over to you. Who stands out to you as you're looking at this list of available free agent safeties?
Yeah, Wags, I'll tell you what. I mean, the guy at the top of the list is Xavier McKinney. He is absolutely the guy that I think he's the prime free agent. He's only 24 years old still. He's an ascending player, played for New York Giants, really talented guy, fits everything I think that this Packers defense is looking for. So he's the guy I think that is the cream of the crop, so to speak. But as you alluded to, Wags, everybody thinks that. It's not just me. It's not just the Packers, I'm sure. It's a lot of other people, and he's probably going to be commanding a significant amount of money. You said it. There's a number of dudes that, have a lot of name recognition, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're guys that are going to fit or make a positive impact on their next team. We see it all the time in NFL free agency, right? So, but a few other guys that just kind of stick out to me, and I'm going through the list right now. You know who I really like? He's getting a little up there in age, but I really always like Jordan Poyer. He's a talented back end safety, played for the Buffalo Bills last year, could fit what the Packers do. Our boy Micah Hyde, while we love Micah Hyde, he's had massive injury issues over the last few years. He's a free agent now, also from Buffalo. I don't see that back in the cards. Sorry, Packers fans. Jamal Adams, big name guy, went to Seattle, signed a huge contract. No chance he comes to Green Bay. He's almost more of a linebacker, I think, than a safety. So I don't think that he's somebody that really fits in Green Bay. A couple names. There's two names that outside of McKinney, though, Wags, that I think could be guys that fans are at least circling. So I want to touch on them. The first one's Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons played for the Denver Broncos last year, had a nice game against the Packers. He's had a lot of fanfare in the NFL over the last few years. I'll tell you what, I've watched a little bit of tape on him. I've also consumed a fair amount of other fans' perspectives on him. And while the name is big, some Denver Bronco fans out there and Denver Bronco beat writers saw him maybe losing a bit of a step last year. That is a huge red flag for me. We saw that with Adrian Amos, right? We loved Adrian Amos's time in Green Bay, but near the end, you could just tell he was about a half step slow, getting to the ball carrier, getting to the wide receiver. And it makes me a little nervous when a number of fans are starting to point that out, or beat writers from Denver. So just kind of paying attention to that is it's a little nerve-wracking for me. But the guy that I really like, If the Packers are not in the Xavier McKinney market, somebody, it's Curl, the safety for the Patriots, Cameron Curl, or excuse me, for Washington. He's a strong safety from Washington Commanders. He's somebody, he actually reminds me of Adrian Amos, and this is who I'm really circling, Cameron Curl. He's not your like superstar player, right? He's not somebody that is just an absolute ball hawk, but what he is he's just good. He's just a good football player. He does everything the right way. He actually reminds me so much of Amos in that he's a good communicator in the back end. He tackles well. He's able to see the field extremely well. We see him communicating well. His stats are certainly there, Wags, but he's not your necessarily superstar at the top end. But he's one of those guys that just is steady and that you can trust and that you can believe in. And I mean, think about those prime years with Adrian Amos, how good the Packers defense could be on the back end. I see somebody like a Cameron Curl, if the Packers could get him at a reasonable cost, reasonable air quotes, right? In NFL free agency, he could be a guy that really fits this defense, that could, really come in and help command the back end of this defense. So that's the guy, Wags, that I'm circling on my calendar, but I'll be curious to see what this free agency market looks like, because as you mentioned, the Packers can't just go and splurge on guys. They're going to have to find a guy that fits not only the defense, but also the financials of this team.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about Xavier McKinney, there is a connection with the Packers now. Derek Ansley, Packers pass game coordinator, was McKinley's defensive backs coach at Alabama when they were there together. And McKinley actually acknowledged recently, it doesn't sound like they have talked recently, so I'm not sure that they're close, but he said, I didn't even know he was with the Chargers still, and that he didn't know he was with the Packers. But when he saw that, he was intrigued. So it doesn't take a lot more than just a little bit of intrigue to open up the door. It at least gives the Packers an opening to have the foot in the door and have a conversation. Is it enough of an opening to be able to afford? And is that the guy that they want? I don't know, but right. It's a nice little connection point that the Packers just happen to have at this point. I think, Dane, I apologize. I was kind of not doing a really good job of listening to your rundown, but I think another name out there that I don't think you mentioned is Jeremy Chinn. He's someone that had a couple of really good years early on with Carolina. Still pretty young player too, so he kind of fits the profile. Maybe wouldn't be super expensive at the position, but a very high RAS guy and someone that has had some productive years of football underneath his belt as well. So could be someone, a type of player, if he profiles to what Hafley wants at that position, that the Packers can maybe make a smaller investment in, still a younger player, and perhaps potentially could be a better fit in Hafley's system and still has a lot of upside at the same time. So he's one other name that I would throw out there to maybe keep an eye on, depending on what happens with this market. But Dane, I happen to agree just overall. I don't see the Packers going out and spending and getting two safeties that they're going to sign like for starting caliber money. I just don't think that that's their MO. And so I think we need to temper expectations a little bit. I'm going to go back to what I said before I hand it over to you. If the Packers don't get one of the guys that they really like at this position group, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up going back to the drawing board. I think they will ultimately try to stock this position with a few veterans. So whether that's the Rudy Ford, Jonathan Owens route, and then maybe one more veteran type player that maybe isn't ascending, but you're looking at a 1 or 2 year type contract with a slightly higher money. That might be the route that ends up happening. And that could just be dependent on what happens in this market. So we'll see. But I don't expect the Packers to go out and sign two guys for $8 to $10 million a year just for the sake of trying to fill this position group.
Yeah, no, I think I tend to agree with you, Wags, on that. So the question becomes, looking at this roster as we dip into free agency, are there other positions, especially with the 3-4 to 4-3 switch? And I know that this Packers team's probably still going to be playing a lot of nickel. So the 4-3 doesn't probably impact the defense entirely, but we've talked offline, and I know fans know the linebacker position's a little thin. D-line could maybe use another guy. So are there other position groups that you see the Packers, especially early in free agency, potentially targeting? Because I'm sure on the back end, they'll add a guy or two, but anybody in this first week or so of free agency, Wags, position groups that you could see this team targeting?
Corner. I think cornerback is always the position you're looking at, and that brings Tayshaun Nixon, I think, into the conversation. So let's talk about him a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, his prime value as his return man. I got a little bit frustrated, as I think you and other Packer fans probably did, with some of his decision making as a return specialist last year. So I question whether he's becoming a little bit more focused on his opportunities to get those returns and stack return yards than he is playing within the team concept. So I hate to question his motives, but sometimes when you see things that are happening on the field, it's hard to ignore that. Granted, he had some moments where he can be a game-changing type player as a return man. We saw that against the 49ers. Now, if he doesn't fumble the ball at the end of the long return, that would certainly be a good thing as well. But at the end of the day, he's someone that can flip the field. And he played corner last year. I would argue that I think the Packers probably want to upgrade a little bit at that nickel corner spot. And Tayshaun had some moments where he held it down. I think he had a lot of snaps out there, and he was fine as a cornerback, strictly speaking. But Dane, I would not be surprised, given some of the injuries that the Packers have had in this secondary, and that has affected the cornerback room as well, that they're going to probably try to draft at corner at some point, but I think they could stand to stabilize that position group a little bit if they're able to go out and find a 1 or 2 year type stopgap at the cornerback position. And it doesn't have to be, cornerback one. I mean, that's Jaire's responsibility, for better or worse. That's what we need from Jaire. But I do think that they could, on the margins, try to upgrade this cornerback position group just from a depth standpoint and a stability of play standpoint. I really hope Eric Stokes can get healthy and come back and have a productive season. I don't think that it's wise at this point to count on that. So I think they're going to draft a guy, but I do think when you look at this cornerback room, it would make sense to invest. Now, Rasul Douglas was traded away. He could have been that guy for one more year. Packers made the decision to move on from Rasul, but I think we need someone in that type of vein for the Packers cornerback room to look a little bit more stable in my mind, regardless of what they do with the draft going into next season.
Yeah, no, it's the slot guy,
so Dane,
right?
I asked you then, so let me set this up for you. As you look at the cornerback group, the slot guy, or maybe on the outside, it's more like that cornerback too. Is there any names that stand out to you that maybe seem feasible? Because we're not going to get a top of the market corner, but I'm curious to see what your assessment is of this cornerback market.
Well, this is going to sound wild because I'm normally more of a young guy, right? Like I like the youth across the board. I love the Packers youth movement in Green Bay, what they've done. This is a little out of the norm for me, but somebody who hasn't fallen off, even despite their advanced age for cornerback, is Patrick Peterson. And I know he's going to be 34 next year, but Wags, he's filthy. He's a press corner. He's a guy who gets in people's faces. last year, yet again, had a nice season over there in Pittsburgh. So he's a guy, when you start talking about a 1-year stopgap, right? Especially if you draft another corner and you're doing youth movement. We really like Carrington Valentine. Patrick Peterson could bring kind of that added oomph to this defense, and he can play across the board, but he can also play in that slot role. So he's somebody that instantly stuck out because I think that the Packers could get him at a reasonable cost. I've always admired how he's played the game. He's an aggressive corner. He's talk about leader. He's another leader, I think, on this team. So he's somebody that I really, really like. And the other guy that I think could potentially be a good fit for this defense is Shaquille Griffin, the corner. He played for Carolina last year. He's another guy that can play outside, can play inside. Maybe not an extreme expenditure at the cornerback position, but a guy who's just done it in the league for a while. This isn't quite the free-for-all that the safety group has become from free agent perspective, but I would argue that there's more free agents this year at corner than I can remember in the last couple of years. So the Packers might be able to get a guy at a slight discount compared to what they would at other seasons at the cornerback position. So I think that this is a really good, astute observation on your end. I also would just say, with Keisean Nixon in mind, I think it's time for the Packers to upgrade this slot position. Absolutely. I don't know, especially with the NFL rules and the way that the kickoffs are just getting basically eliminated. I'm not sure if there's value in bringing K9 back unless it's a very, very low number. I just don't see that happening. I think that the slot position needs to be upgraded in Green Bay. So I'm eager to see what the Packers do, but don't be surprised if there's a couple new names at corner on this defense in Green Bay in 2024.
Yeah, I agree. And it's probably not going to be, an everyday name type of player, but someone that maybe some fans have some recognition with. But I do think that it makes sense. This is a position group, sign one veteran, let's go into the draft. Maybe to your point, we've got Eric Stokes, we've got Carrington Valentine. Those are guys that we can be excited about, especially I think what Carrington Valentine did last year. Eric Stokes, if he can be healthy, but again, I'm not going to sit here and count on that, unfortunately. But it just gives us a little bit more flexibility. I think it gives us more depth, and I think gives us more stability. And that's what we'd really be looking for. So, Dane, I think let's go back to the Packers free agents, a couple other guys that we should just mention or talk about, maybe because they're moving on. But AJ Dillon, it looks like Packers are most likely going to be moving on from him. Let's talk a little bit about that. Dillon, I think, has been a great Packer, a great guy in the locker room. There's some folks that might say that he was a little bit of a bust as a second-round pick. I think he was productive in his time in Green Bay, but frankly, just didn't earn a second contract for a running back in my eyes. And I think the team probably feels the same way, especially if you're looking at Aaron Jones. I think he's probably extended the life of his time in Green Bay a little bit past what the Packers may have expected when they drafted AJ Dillon. And so it doesn't really make sense for the Packers to invest more money in AJ Dillon when in all likelihood, he has not shown that he can be the guy to carry the running back position for 17 weeks of the season as the bell cow type running back. I think he's a nice complementary running back, but I don't think that he's the type of player that they're going to sign money to. So frankly, they can look in the draft. Probably they've got a lot of draft picks, second, third round. Get someone that's got fresh legs, younger player that they can ride a little bit if Aaron Jones needs to, cut back his carries, especially at certain points of the season, is dinged up for a week or two, whatever. So I think that's more likely the route that the Packers go with this running back group. Do you agree with that, or do you think there's a world where AJ Dillon could be back in Green Bay?
I agree with everything you said. I think there's a world where AJ Dillon could be back in Green Bay, but I hope it's not the case for AJ. And what I mean by that is, if he's out there for 2 months in free agency and he can come back on like a 1 year, $2.5 million deal, right? It's something that's just bargain basement. But I hope for AJ Dillon, that's not the case as a man, because I think that he has value somewhere. I agree with you, Wags. I think it's exceedingly unlikely that AJ Dillon's back. I mean, we had even heard rumors as the season was progressing last year that the Packers were in play to try to trade for a veteran running back, right? So clearly the Packers, even in that time, were looking to add guys to the room. So wouldn't be surprised if the draft is a route. I also wouldn't be totally shocked if the Packers don't dip into free agency for a guy if it's a depressed market, because the running back market is historically not one that the guys get what they are looking for. And if the Packers want to do a combo there, I'm not saying the top end names, right? I'm not saying it's going to be the Giants running back or anybody like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they sneak in and add a veteran, also draft a guy, and then you've got Emmanuel Wilson, who I really like, and I think the Packers like as well, and you just see an open competition behind Aaron Jones. So, but yeah, I just don't think AJ Dillon is likely in the cards unless free agency is very, very cruel to him, and the Packers can get him back on a 1 year, very low prove-it deal.
All right. I think we're in agreement there. And then the last guy, two other guys we could talk about that are technically free agents. First, let's talk about Jon Runyan. He's been a starting guard now for the Packers for a few seasons, and just signed Drew Rosenhaus. So I don't think any of these guys are taking quote unquote hometown discounts. You can throw that out the window, but Jon Runyan, it's probably his big opportunity to get an NFL contract. Realistically, just looking at it now, maybe he's a guy that plays into his 30s, but this is probably his big opportunity for an NFL contract. He's not going to be a top of the market guard, but I'm skeptical that he's going to be back in Green Bay. Maybe the Packers value him as a guard for the next 3-4 years. They saw some rotation with Sean Ryan with, I'd say, mixed results, but it was interesting that it happened nonetheless. So whether it's Sean Ryan or whether it's someone else that's not on the team right now, I'd be a little bit surprised if Packers don't go in a different direction, despite some of the talk out there that there's mutual interest. I think they like Jon Runyan. I'm just not sure they like Jon Runyan at whatever his salary is going to end up being to try to sign the guy for the next 3-4 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, he has totally outperformed his draft position, right? He was a late round draft guy who came in and has played a lot of meaningful snaps for some really good Green Bay Packer football teams. So I'm good on Runyan, but I agree. I think that they like him at what his salary was last year. I'm not sure if they're going to bring him back at a free agent market where there's always competition for inside offensive linemen, especially younger guys that have a lot of starting experience. So I agree. I don't think John's coming back unless the market completely drops off, but that's not happening. Somebody's going to give Jon Runyan Jr. Enough money to go somewhere else. I think about Lucas Patrick and guys like that have been able to parlay their time in Green Bay and the interior into starting jobs. Jon Runyan Jr. He's going to get an opportunity to just be a starter somewhere else at a higher salary. It's not going to be in Green Bay.
Yep, agreed. So, all right, and then we've got an exclusive right free agent in Daniel Whelan at the punter position. I expect Packers to bring him back. He's not going to hit the open market, but any additional commentary there, I think they've got to be pretty happy with what they got from Whelan last year. So it makes sense to me that they would just move forward with him. He's not going to be costing the team more than whatever a punter on an exclusive right free agents deal cost. And maybe they bring in another guy off the street for camp as competition, as they usually want to do. But I would expect to see Whelan back in Green Bay next season. So
yeah, Danny Dimes coming back.
I think last before we wrap things up, just to stick make sure we're looking at every level. And I think it sounds like defense is where we would expect the Packers to spend if they do spend in free agency. We didn't talk about two positions groups, defensive line and linebacker. Just looking at the defensive line, here's my thought. And I don't know if you agree with this. We talked about this a little bit before we jumped on the air. I think the Packers more likely would attack defensive line, especially defensive end / edge in the draft than in free agency. When I look at this list of free agent defensive ends / edge guys, it doesn't really inspire a lot. I mean, there's a couple of names here and there, but to be honest with you, I don't think this is a market that it would make sense for the Packers to, nor do I expect them to invest in. I really like Lucas Van Ness. I think he's got a lot of upside potential going into year 2. We know what we can get with Rashawn Gary with hopefully a full healthy season. I think Preston Smith continues to play at a high level, and we see his value to the Packers, but certainly I wouldn't mind. I think this is a perfect window for the Packers to add at that position group, continue adding with Lucas Van Ness being the guy they drafted last year. But you can never have enough guys on the edge, on the defensive line. And so Preston Smith, maybe he's in his last year or 2 with the Packers. Realistically, I'd love to see him continue to outperform expectations as he gets into his 30s. But I think it makes sense that it's more the draft route, draft and develop at this position group, than attacking the free agency market with this group at this point in time. Do you agree with that? Or are there some guys on the free agency list on the D line that you'd be taking a look at?
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, just draft and develop. That's you're right. There's certain position groups that you just should always be adding guys to every year. And I think that the edge group right now, the Packers are in a privileged position because they put themselves in that position, because they've been investing in this role, and they've been hitting with the guys that they've invested in. But yeah, Wags, there's nobody that sticks out in the free agent market. And honestly, oftentimes when edge rushers hit free agency, it's because maybe they're underperformed a little bit because it's such a premium position. So draft that position, learn, and let them rotate in. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the Packers add 1 or 2 edge guys in the draft yet again this year.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about linebacker. If we do cut Devondre Campbell, be a little thin at that position group. Now, certainly could be one that I also expect them to not necessarily spend a high premium on in the draft. Although if they got a guy that they really like they did with Quay Walker a couple years ago, perhaps we'll see. We can see that. I still think Quay Walker has a ton of upside potential. And so I'm really eager to see what he's able to do in this new defense. But if we can add to this position group with another veteran type player to, again, similar to the cornerback situation, provide depth and stability, and invest in that in the draft, so that you've got the draft and develop approach, but hopefully you're covered on both sides of that. I think linebacker is definitely a position that makes sense to take a look at. Liked what we saw from Isaiah McDuffie. He's reunited with Coach Hafley. He played his last season in Boston College under Coach Hafley. So certainly some familiarity there, and I expect him to be able to compete for one of the starting positions at inside linebacker. But Dane, this is a group that I could see the Packers going and signing a guy in free agency as well. So again, one last time, turn it over to you as you look at the list of unrestricted free agents that are out there. Any names that stand out to you from a linebacker position?
Yeah, so I think Quay Walker is going to be a really good weak side linebacker in a 4-3. I think it's going to allow him to have an opportunity to rush the passer more. So I'll just put my name on that right away. He should be rushing the passer more. We saw it the last 2 years. He's naturally gifted at doing that. So let's let him loose a little bit more. Yes, Isaiah McDuffie really just completely impressed me over the last couple of years. He's played some really good football. But that doesn't mean that the Packers couldn't go inside linebacker and bring in a veteran. It's another market where inside linebackers, we're fortunate this year, Wags. A lot of the need position groups for the Packers are position groups that aren't necessarily high spending position groups across the league. The one that's going to stick out, because I think a lot of Packer fans were hoping he'd be drafted a number of years ago and he didn't come to Green Bay, is Patrick Queen from Baltimore. And he sticks out to me. He's kind of underperformed his draft position, but that doesn't mean he can't be a consistently good tackler. And he has been, I think, in his time in the NFL. So that's the guy right away, Wags, that sticks out to me is Patrick Queen. I don't think that he's going to get a massive deal either from Baltimore. So he could be a guy that the Packers circle. He's somebody that can truly play that traditional inside linebacker role extremely well. I don't see the Packers touching any of the more aged out guys. There's a number of guys that are just getting up there in age, the Bobby Wagners of the world, the Levante Davids of the world. They're getting a little bit up there. But yeah, I just looking around, maybe like a Shaquille Leonard, played in Philadelphia last year. There's a couple other guys out there, but I don't have specifics outside of maybe a Patrick Queen, other than, yeah, the Packers are probably adding somebody to that inside linebacker room.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said. Maybe this isn't fair, but the only thing that makes me nervous about trying to spend or bid on a guy like Patrick Queen is Baltimore Ravens are such a well-run franchise. I put them up there with, in the top 5 with the Packers, of course, and how they go about doing their business. And he's a guy that they drafted, and he's coming off of his rookie deal. And if the Ravens let him get away, that makes me a little suspicious of why they would allow that to happen. And so and the Packers are not going to be a team that's going to be out there overspending and they just blow out the market, and the Ravens just throw up their hands and say, well, we like Patrick Queen, but not at that price. So it just, I don't see that marriage happening. I think he's the type of guy that makes sense to take a look at, both from an age and productivity standpoint, and with the connection that we had with him, coming out and hoping that we might draft him. I don't think this is a name that makes any sense either, but I'm just going to throw it out there because it's the one you didn't mention. Devin White, I think his time in Tampa Bay might be coming to an end. It seems like they're not quite on the same page there. He actually got replaced at middle of the season. He had an injury, and then there was some grumblings with his performance. You may remember that he was a healthy scratch when the Buccaneers came up to Lambeau and played the Packers. But certainly from a talent standpoint, he's only 26 years old. He's had some extremely productive years in the NFL. So if he's a little disgruntled, let's say, in Tampa Bay, and he's looking for a change of scenery, I think you could do worse as long as they don't have to break the bank for a guy like that. So maybe if he's scouring the market and the long-term deal isn't there, I'll take a look. I don't think he's the type of guy that the Packers traditionally would go after in free agency, especially at this position group, but thought I'd throw that out there as a name to, at least keep an eye on to see what happens with this market. Because I'll tell you what, in past seasons, Devin White would be the type of guy that would go out and get a 3-4 year deal for, $50 million plus on day 1 or day 2 of free agency. I don't think that's going to happen this year. We'll see. Packers certainly are not going to be the team that's going to make that happen. But if it's been a week or two and this linebacker market remains a little bit flat as well, it'll be interesting to see. Most of the inside linebacker free agency guys, as you mentioned, are getting up there in age. So it's an interesting look at what they could do. To me, it makes sense. Let's cut Devondre Campbell. They may not necessarily be able to make a huge upgrade at the position by getting another veteran guy, but I do think they could replace the cost of Devondre Campbell at a much lower level, and that makes it more tenable to be able to bring someone in at that $4 to $6 million level for a shorter term deal.
It's good insight. I love it, Wags. I love it. Anything else you can think of? I mean, I'm so excited for free agency, man. It's always fun to see this happen and see how the Packers are really positioning themselves. So, any other surprise free agent spots before we wrap this thing up today?
No, I would just say they said Jordan Love expecting the May timeframe that they're going to get a deal done, is I think what Goody said. I wouldn't be shocked if it's sooner than that. So I think quietly that was kind of a under promise, over deliver situation. So I wouldn't be shocked if in the next couple of weeks we see a new Jordan Love contract announced, and that we have a little bit more clarity in terms of what the financial situation looks like heading into the rest of the offseason.
That's great. Yeah, good for Jordan. He's drinks
Dane,
around
any
Jordan.
other predictions for you? You're mute. Oh, I thought you. I think let's close out here. But before we do, any predictions of all the guys we talked about? Let's first, who would you most like the Packers to sign, regardless of whether you think it's realistic or not? And who do you think is a guy that you expect, if you could make one prediction, that the Packers will sign in free agency in the next week or two?
I honestly believe the Packers are going to sign Cameron Curl from Washington. I have a feeling that he fits everything. He checks the boxes. I think that they're going to spend in free agency and bring in a veteran. I think that he's the right fit. So not only do I want it, but I think that the Packers are circling him. He's just fits Green Bay extremely well. So Cameron Curl, safety from Washington, is kind of my choice there. Do you have anybody that sticks out to you?
No, I'm just gonna wait and see what happens, because we see this every year. We said it at the top, we're getting excited for free agency, but I am going to temper my expectations, leave them low, and then no matter what happens, if the Packers go out and get a guy or two, I can be super excited about it, regardless of whether I thought it was the right thing or if they could have done more. So I feel like that's the most healthy and mentally healthy approach to take when it comes to Packer free agency. I'm not saying the rest of you out there have to take that approach, but I am choosing to do that for myself as we move forward. So, Dane, this was fun. Thanks for taking the time this morning, talk a little bit about free agency, and thanks everyone for tuning in and listening. Please share us with friends. We're still working hard. We've got a couple of guys that we're working hard to align on schedules to hopefully get on here as player interviews as we move through the rest of this off season. But we'll have more content coming. So thanks for your patience as we have been enjoying a little bit of time off as well during the off season here. But we'll have a lot more to come, especially as we ramp up with hopefully some free agency signings and the draft coming up in the next month or so as well. So as always, be legendary and go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.
Every year I know we gonna go hard. We been that team ever since Bart started. All my cheese heads go Pack, go. Ain't showing no mercy, cutting no slack, no. I ain't a bad sport and I'll even wish you good luck. Only thing I will